Hey listeners, Bridget here. Disrupting Peace is now in its 4th season, and we want to learn more about you. Can you fill out a short survey, and I promise it is very short, to let us know what you like about the show, how we can do better, and topics you'd like us to tackle? The link to the survey is available at worldpeacefoundation.org/survey. All right, here's the episode. Welcome to Disrupting Peace, a show about why peace hasn't worked and how it still could. I'm Bridget Conley, Research Director at the World Peace Foundation. This season, we've explored forces that get in the way of accurate information and peacemaking. One theme has repeated across discussions: how AI can muddy the information ecosystem in ways that fuel conflicts. Today, we're spinning this issue around and asking, how can AI benefit peace? Johanna Poutanen is the head of Inclusion and Digital Innovation at the CMI Martti Ahtisaari Peace Foundation. One of her priorities is to address the opportunities and risks that digital technologies present for peacemaking. She has over 2 decades of experience in mediation, including in Yemen, Palestine, South Sudan, and Nepal. Evelyne Tauchnitz is a postdoc and lecturer at the University of Lucerne's Graduate School in Ethics. Her research focuses on how digital technologies can be employed to build, support, and maintain peace through nonviolent methods of conflict transformation. Together, we'll discuss the promise and limitations of AI for peace. We'll explore whether the risks outweigh the benefits, why we need more guidelines and limits on AI's development, and promising ways that AI is bringing more voices into peace mediation work, including a specific example from Yemen. This conversation was recorded in March 2026. Evelyne, Johanna, welcome to Disrupting Peace.
Thank you for having me here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Such a pleasure to be here.
We're going to start with an icebreaker of sorts. So let's get the big picture question that everybody wants the answer to. Will AI cure all evils or destroy humanity? Johanna, what's your take on this one?
Are these the only 2 options? It's either or. Because otherwise I will abstain.
Fair. Evelyne, for you, are you on Team Utopia or Team Apocalypse?
Well, I don't think that AI can save humanity if humanity is not able to save itself, either with AI or without it, So I think I would not go for black or white either.
Okay, so now that we've established that a simple view of AI's impact on peace is not helpful, let's move deeper into a more nuanced picture by asking, how could AI contribute to peacemaking? And as background for our listeners, I know that in season 1, we discussed a common greatest fear related to AI and conflict, the idea of killer robots. And earlier this season, we addressed AI in the context of propaganda and how mis and disinformation can escalate violence. But that's not the full story. So, Johanna, I wanted to start with you. You've been innovating the use of AI in mediating actual armed conflicts. So can you give us an idea of how you've used AI in peace mediation processes?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are 3 main ways that I would highlight. One is for better analysis in really understanding conflict dynamics, emerging tensions, because AI is very helpful in using various sources of information, both from social media, scholarly literature, local languages, various kind of news outlets, etc., that we can really synthesize and start to see a broader, deeper picture of conflict dynamics. And if we can tap into that understanding and knowledge, we would be in a better position to see emerging tensions before they actually erupt into conflicts and enhance conflict prevention. And for example, there are actors who are doing this work. In Uppsala University, there's, for instance, this program called called Views that was able to forecast major changes in Syria before the recent events where the dictatorship was overthrown. And this was visible in data sets before it was visible to much of the rest of the world. So that's really one. This one is better analysis. Second is listening at scale. We know there is a perennial challenge in much of peace mediation work when it comes to, how many people can you actually engage in a political process? How many people can sit around the table? And AI can really offers new channels and new platforms to understand the expectations, the thinking, the interests, the hopes of a wider set of stakeholders, youth, citizen, different constituencies at various levels, and kind of bring, at least if not themselves and their voices to the table, their substantive thinking. Where are the key questions? What should be tackled in a process? What are the possible pathways to peace and the like? And thirdly, it's also better decision making. I think AI could support decision making by mediators in terms of scenario building, both kind of building their own strategy on the basis of improved analysis, thinking through various options, serving as a critical friend. But of course, across all of these three potential roles, it is not about replacing the human element in peacemaking. It is actually providing new resources, new platforms for human-led peacemaking. So that's where we see the potential.
So can you tell me more about the way that you've used AI platforms to bring more voices to the table? And I think this one is really interesting too, because a lot of people think that mediation is sort of two belligerents, of this very small number of voices that need to be heard. So do you have any examples of how you've been able to bring in a wider swathe of a population to the discussions?
Yeah, absolutely. For instance, a recent example is that we've been supporting a political dialogue process among Yemen's leading political parties. So Yemen has been struggling with civil war and with major humanitarian disaster over a decade. They've been developing a joint vision to really look at a longer-term trajectory for the country. And they realized, because the dialogue has been mainly led by political leadership, they recognize the population, that the demographics are not reflected. We know majority of population are youth, so they were also keen to understand what are the youth perspectives on the key questions that they have been discussing. And here we used the help of AI. So we developed a kind of WhatsApp-based consultation model where we had a set of questions, open-ended questions that were shared with 150 youth from different parties that participated. And key was that it wasn't a survey that you had like a set of couple of answers that you had to tick the box, that you could give qualitative inputs through voice messages in your own language, in Yemeni Arabic, reflecting kind of your aspirations, their own views, expectations for the future. And then we also used AI to analyze and go through this immense material to look at some of the commonalities, some of the common narratives where there were main clusters of agreement, disagreement, and that actually had something that was digestible to also bring back to the political leadership and the youth themselves. So that we really got a more nuanced understanding, not only one youth or two youth, but really a wide group of young people and what their thinking was across the country on these key political questions.
So in your experience, and I'm going to ask this first to you, Johanna, but I'd also like Evelyne to consider, what makes the difference between effective and ineffective adoption of AI for peacemaking?
Well, first, and I think most important thing, is that you have to start with the real needs of the process and the people in it and the political realities of the context. You cannot start with technology. And I think, with this hype and excitement with new technologies, there is a real risk of like, hey, we have this, hammer, where can we just find some nails? But you have to understand that and start with like, what are the dilemmas? Who are we wanting to reach? Or what's the deeper analysis that we need to have? And then think about what are the technological solutions. So that's the most important. Second, I think that there's a real challenge if you're not bringing key criteria around transparency and human oversight to the process. So for instance, where we've used AI to analyze large amounts of data, we really only use platforms that we can track how they're actually synthesizing, how they are harmonizing all the materials so we can go back in every step of the process to really double check manually and with human oversight how the end result is brought about. And then the third is about data security and privacy. I think we need to be really careful in this fragile context that we really think through how sensitive information is handled, if that is, and that we make sure there's little personal information as possible. Those who participate know what happens to their inputs and how it's stored. And those aspects are extremely important. And I think those three are also the main risk where we can really go wrong if we are not having a human oversight, if we start with the technology, or if we're not really upholding the basic principles of privacy.
Yeah. Evelyne, what about in your research and writing and experience? What makes the difference between effective and ineffective uses of AI?
I would want to start with data security and privacy. I think it's extremely important point because you need to protect those who give you the information. And a slight thing which I also would like to elaborate on, which Johanna mentioned, is I think we really have to avoid this techno-solutionism. Means that we're having technologies and then think what problems they can address. I think we should rather start with the problems and then check if technology can help us solve these problems. And what I think we also need to be aware of is that most technology or most AI is not developed in the beginning for peaceful purposes. So quite often it was in fact developed for simple profit making or for military security purposes. And then it gets like repurposed for peace, but you might still have that security thinking behind it. And so security and peace is very close, but it's not exactly the same. So talking about surveillance, for example, it can be argued that it's both for security and it can be for peace. But the line is sometimes very thin. So you really have to be careful. What do we actually want to achieve with this technology?
Yeah.
Because I mean, surveillance, I think, is a really good example. Of course, you need a minimum of security in order to have peace. But at the same time, it creates new problems, like for repression, for political activists, what is done with their data, and so on. And my last and I think most important point is that AI, it can help us to transform data or information into knowledge. And I mean, that's very important to have knowledge about conflict dynamics, about what is going on the ground, what are the options when you're having peace negotiation processes, what opinions are there, what are the stakeholders, as Joanna mentioned as well. But I think what is really lacking is the transformation from, it's working well from data to information and knowledge, but there's also a thing in philosophy called practical wisdom, phronesis, which has more to do like what is actually the right thing to do in a specific situation. And I think AI cannot tell us that, because that really has to do with more capacity, also with the freedom of choice. And AI does not have that. I mean, AI is going to do simple rule following, however it was programmed, but it's not good at making exceptions because AI is based on statistical patterns. It recognizes patterns from data, which, by the way, is from the past. So we really have to be careful also of not getting stuck in the past. I mean, what has worked in the past is not necessarily going to work in the present or even in the future. And I mean, if you think of conflict dynamics, it could also happen that an AI just definitely continues to think in conflict patterns because that's what has happened in the past. But actually, to get out of conflict, you need to break these cycles. There needs to be something new. It needs still that human component, I think, which is based on a practical wisdom in the sense of knowing when to apply which rule or knowing how to act in a specific context in that specific situation. And I mean, conflict is all about human beings at the end. And human beings, they are not always acting according to past patterns. And they should not actually, if you want to get out of conflicts. So
Yes.
I think that human element is really, really important.
Yeah. And Johanna, your response addressed some of the concerns Evelyne brought forward. I wondered if her response made you consider other ideas that are important to have on the table.
No, I absolutely love this concept of practical wisdom and what Evelyne is saying, the limitations of AI, of really looking at the past and kind of drawing its own recommendations and so on, what has been done and the knowledge exists. And, if we think about peace processes, we also know that there's a lot of failed peace processes in the past, and the mediation praxis and the knowledge that we have is not perfect. So we do definitely need new approaches. However, what I would add therein is that actually it's the capabilities of AI to broaden inclusion and to bring the voices of segments of populations that have not necessarily been part of those conversations, in some ways could kind of address a little bit of that gap, because it is bringing some of the practical wisdom of those who are affected by conflict to the conversation through the avenues that it's able to provide around reach and analysis, as shared earlier. So there is something about the practical wisdom that we could extend much further.
Yeah, if I might just shortly add to that, I think that's actually a huge potential to bring new actors in, because policymaking has always focused on certain actors and not on others. I mean, specifically the youth, as you mentioned, or women, of course, or even people living very remotely in rural areas. So I think that is really one of the hugest potential as well with AI, to be able to combine these different views and try to find some common ground there somewhere, maybe which would have escaped human attention.
Yeah. Evelyne, so the advent of AI, it's definitely changing weapon systems and peacemaking processes. But I'm curious about something that you've written about. You've urged people to think about how AI will impact not just negative peace, so the idea of whether there is war or not war, but also positive peace, understood, and I'm going to quote you, if you don't mind, as positive interactions between people, groups, and institutions that are guided by, and here's another quote from you, ethical principles of human dignity and freedom. Right. So this is a much broader sense of what peace is or what peace could be. Using that definition, what other questions should we be asking about the future of AI and peace?
To start with, I think human dignity and freedom really sit at the core of peace, because peace is often used in very ambivalent ways. I mean, wars have been justified in the name of peace, continue to be justified in the name of peace. Everybody wants peace. The big question is, how do we get there? I mean, peace, it's so difficult to pin it down. And so that's why I personally like to apply an ethics of human rights, how I call it, to my own research, which is really based on these two core values of human dignity, meaning that every person has an intrinsic value, and freedom. Freedom, why? Because freedom distinguishes peace from security. I mean, think, for example, of a high security prison. People are very secure in a high security prison, but nobody would say that it's a peaceful place to be, right? So freedom is absolutely necessary there too. And I mean, that's a tricky part, really. I think when we discuss like how can AI contribute to peace building, first we need to define what kind of peace do we want to achieve. And even there, AI, I think, can be helpful, as mentioned by Johanna too, to really broaden the participants in this discussion, because peace can mean very different things in different places. Maybe it doesn't mean the same thing in Sudan as it means in Europe or in Asia or wherever. So conceptions of peace may vary. And it's a bit tricky there, because at the same time, you still need some ethical point of reference. Because if you would do that, for example, in a society where women are notoriously excluded, that might be peace for you, but it would still be violating, for instance, human rights. But actually, it could be a point where AI could help us, by the way, to really find a common ground also, precisely because people often discuss about peace and they really don't mean the same thing. And then, I mean, you're asking about these positive interactions. In one article also, I've written about social capital and resilience, like how can we make societies more resilient, but not resilient in terms of security necessarily, but in terms of peace, meaning that how can we avoid like social bonds breaking down? How can we instead strengthen social bonds in communities, but also with other communities? Because you have bonding capital inside a group, but then you also have bridging capital with other groups. And I think this is extremely important to not only have strong in-group relations, but also with other groups. And there, of course, digital change is already doing a lot by itself. I mean, we can communicate and connect with anybody in the world instantly, which was not possible before.
Yeah, what we're doing today.
What we're doing today. I mean, the default option is already that we're more connected. And I mean, sometimes also new connections, it's not always positive. I mean, interactions can be friendly, but also non-friendly, right?
And also the inequalities of who has access to which types of connection.
The inequalities, yeah. So I think in a way, the infrastructure is being built today. They're going to connect us. They're going to be more and more interactions, but we should really think starting about the qualities of those interactions.
AI will change the quality.
Yes. How AI will change it. And I mean, trust is going to be such a basic thing.
I think those are really important questions. And the field of peacemaking and peace building has been a little bit shy to adopt new technologies. And I think in some ways it's a reflection of those ethical concerns, Evelyne, that you're talking about. It's also a reflection of economic concerns, like it's not where investment's being done. So how do we get more people who care deeply about the qualitative approach to ending conflict and to building positive social connections, to have a larger voice in the development of AI itself? Johanna, have you grappled with this challenge?
Absolutely have. And you know, it's kind of the $1 million question. How do we do that? When it comes to AI, much of our conversation is focused on the dystopic scenarios. It's going to, you know, take all of our jobs and make warfare even more inhumane. But where is the visioning and the conversation about how we can leverage for something positive? How can innovation really work for dialogue rather than against it? I think there needs to be a real conversation with those who are producing and who are designing technology, with those who are affected by conflicts, and also who are working in the realm of peace, dialogue, trust building. Peace tech, as was, you know, the hype word a few years back, it's not then economically very viable. There's not a lot of money there. So, but you know, we should probably not count everything in money. I think you can, if it's about the short-term investment or the long-term gains. So that's where we should really think about investing for the long term.
And as I'm sure both of you are quite well aware, in the US in February, the Pentagon canceled a contract with Anthropic over their request for guarantees that their AI system Claude would not be used for domestic mass surveillance and autonomous weapons. And the Secretary of, I guess, War now, Pete Hegseth, not only refused that, canceled the contract, and is claiming that the company is a supply chain risk, which could cripple the company's entire future. So there's a lot that one could unravel from this incident, but the one I'd like your thoughts on is that question about the limits on the development of AI. And what should responsible governments be concerned about? What limits should they be demanding from AI systems? Johanna, I'll start with you and then ask Evelyne.
That is a very big question. I mean, there is about technology providers. I think we should also direct attention to the use of the technology at the same time. We know that we don't have the governance framework yet or international legal framework to address the new type of challenges that come with new technologies. So there at least has to be ethical principles that guide it. I mean, transparency is certainly one thing, that there has to be clarity. And of course, and human rights, the existing frameworks that are there should be underpinning it all. Like, it's not that we need to come up with completely new things from scratch. It's about applying what has been done, the frameworks that have been already agreed with, you know, with real accountability to also new types of technologies.
Yeah, so keep those foundations and then just make sure that they're applied in a way that creates principles to guide new technology like AI. Evelyne, what would you add to that? What should policymakers be doing to help guide the development of AI?
I agree with the view that we should already build on what we have, especially human rights, because I don't think that we have the political window of opportunity right now, which would produce better normative frameworks than we have. Like, there's always a risk also that you go a step back with new regulations.
Yeah.
So pragmatically speaking, I think we should rather enforce human rights as an ethical point of reference, both for states and for private technology companies.
So whose job is it to make sure that this applies in a new, innovative sector? I mean, obviously, you would think governments, but this is bigger than any one country. So how would you take that next step?
I mean, you would say governments, of course, as a first thing, because the governments are the ones responsible to make sure human rights are respected by everybody, including tech companies. But you mentioned the case of Anthropic. I mean, sometimes governments may be, in a way, less committed to certain ethical or legal standards than companies themselves. So that's not the best preconditions.
Yeah, it's a description of the conundrum.
Yeah.
I can't help but wonder, given the risks, for example, oppressive governments wanting sensitive data, is it even worth it to try to use AI for peace building? I mean, if we're not sure we can get it right in terms of protecting people.
Well, if I may, I think it's a great question, like whether there's sometimes the biggest risks, whether they actually outweigh even the potential benefits. And I think you have to bring that thought into the design. So you cannot design an effort that would be, the risks would be so high that they would, in fact, overshadow the potential benefits. Pretty much in any of these consultations using digital technologies, you should never ask very sensitive questions if there is any link to the personality. Even with all of the best of the guardrails of, delinking that and anonymizing that, and there has to be a relationship of trust between those who are organizing any such consultations or creating these digital platforms and the stakeholders who participate.
Can you give us a specific example of what that looks like?
Well, like in the case of Yemen, we designed the set of questions together with the parties themselves. And then it wasn't CMI who were sending them to the participants. It was through the party networks. And they was like, okay, this is what we're doing. They were explaining in a practical terms. What it looked like for them is that they just had this conversation coming into their WhatsApp that they recorded voice messages to the questions. And again, here we thought about not having too sensitive questions asked, but there's still that way of relevance. And then in the analysis process, we very early on delinked the personal information from the actual substantive input. So no matter with all of the safeguards we have in the way we handle the data, you have to think those through.
I think there's also lots of possibilities with non-personal data involved. I mean, for example, space technology. Look at satellites. You could actually just look, are there any suspicious weapons or troop movements to warn civilians, to tell them some danger is approaching. And I think that's absolutely worth it if you can protect human life. And even for reconciliation processes afterwards, like if you're using, for example, open source intelligence to reconstruct what has actually happened. And that might be really important for trying to find justice and reconciliation and establishing the facts, even after conflicts. And that doesn't necessarily involve personal data. I mean, it could, but with certain technology, again, encryption and so on, it could at least potentially be safeguarded. And I mean, with satellite images, simply looking what are troop movements and then trying to warn civilians, I think it's an absolutely necessary step to do.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, what was mentioned with the trust, I think it takes a lot of time to build up trust. And so, of course, we do need very reliable technologies to not lose that too quickly, because if something then goes wrong, the chance is missed. I mean, for example, here in Switzerland, Switzerland is very advanced democratic technology and so on. But since years, we're trying to do an electronic voting system. And they're finding all the time, they're finding security gaps. And so it's not been implemented on a national level yet. And there are sometimes pilot projects, and that's probably the way out, to have small pilot projects before you implement it at scale. But I think once trust is lost, it's going to be a really hard one to regain it. So you need the reliable technologies first.
And to build a small point to Evelyne's remarks around, there is a lot of data that we could use better for conflict prevention and conflict resolution that is not personalized, like I said earlier, in terms of conversations that are already ongoing on social media or number of various very good quality reports that may be produced by local civil society organizations that if you can add that knowledge up and you are able to draw broader patterns from it, that doesn't put anybody at risk, but that actually it is just making better use of the information we already have. So that's where we could leverage AI much better.
So I'd love to hear more about the role of tech companies and governments. And specifically, some people argue that it doesn't matter if we have limits on AI because if China or Russia don't have limitations, then we won't have safe AI. Can you speak to that?
I mean, tech companies, they do have a lot of power, and I think they're going to have more in the future. Many of them going to have more than states themselves. And that's going to really increase in the future. So, I mean, if you would have conscious tech leaders, that would be really worth a lot. I think it would be really great to have leadership courses for tech CEOs in virtuous leadership, because lots of them might not be aware of the responsibility they're having. Or they might sense it, but very vaguely, and they're not able to grasp it. They're feeling insecure of it. So how to fill that leadership virtuously? Because no matter if we like it or not, tech companies are going to have more power in the future than now. It's probably just going to be a fact. And so how do we handle that? At the same time, they're not democratically elected. And I mean, yes, of course, you have the geopolitical competition with and without AI. But I mean, what values we really design into technology, it's going to define also what societies we're going to be living in. And maybe this could be an argument. I mean, if China or Russia don't have the same values and don't design that into their technology, well, okay, but I mean, in Europe or the US, we might have our values too. So we should actually make sure we also get that into that technology that we're designing. Because if we're not, then we also gonna live in a different world simply.
I think one of the big challenges too is the role of companies, right? Ultimately, whether they're judged successful or not is their bottom line. They're there to make profit. That's what companies, for-profit companies do. That's not what governments, in theory, are supposed to be about. They're supposed to be, in theory, right, about safely and equitably governing the resources of a mass diverse people within their borders. So I don't know, I feel very terrified at the idea that the challenge is to do ethical training for tech people. I don't know, there's some part of me that says, no, we have to get ahead of that within states and then multilateral processes. We've failed terribly when it comes to nuclear weapons, for instance, which is another area where, there's weaponry or new technologies that really involve the entire world because of their bad effects. But we have to get ahead of this. I find it shocking how
it is
exponentially AI could change the world and how slow governments have been to act responsibly, to control or to, set those guiding principles.
It has been always a historical tendency that there is a lag when there is innovation. There are technological revolutions before legislation and governance catches up. And now the speed by which the new technologies are developing, it's kind of outstripping even the most determined efforts. So I think that needs to be quicker. And also civil societies, we need to be quicker in asking that from the government. So everybody has a responsibility in that regard. Second point that I would add, of course, it matters a huge deal, how technologies are designed, but we talk about dual-use technology. There's for commercial use that they can be adopted for military purposes, but we can also talk about triple use, where same technologies could be then also used for peace, for dialogue, for trust building.
So I'd like to end our conversation with a question that we call collective dreaming. So imagine we're 30 years into the future, and collectively, humans have managed to minimize the worst threats of new technologies, including AI, and to maximize the positive impacts. What do we need to do now in our lifetime in order to get to that better future? Johanna, can I start with you?
Yes. Well, first, we do need those cross-sectoral partnerships. We need to start talking with our governments to, provide some guardrails with the technology companies to inspire and also ask for them to develop technology that can be effectively used for dialogue, trust building, for peace, conflict prevention, and conflict resolution. And we, as peace practitioners, we certainly need to do our homework, learn what's out there. We kind of have to resist that dualistic thinking that either technology is going to destroy it all or solve it all, but really with consideration, thoughtfulness, and vigilance to start little by little adopting new technologies in ways that really advance and strengthen conflict prevention, conflict resolution, and do that with those partnerships with technology sector, most of all with conflict-affected communities and those who actually know what the real problems are and how we can support in resolving them.
Yeah. Evelyne, what about you? How would you answer that?
Wow, it's a really difficult question. I mean, what my first answer is, but it doesn't really help us. But I would actually say we need a spiritual revolution to accompany the technology revolution. Because if it's just technology going quicker and quicker, and we're not keeping up with that, as humans, as a human being, it's just gonna overrun us. So I think there really needs to be like some awareness, some critical self-reflection related to conflicts. I mean, most conflicts don't start because of facts, but because of the perception of facts. So how do we perceive each other? How do we communicate with each other? And I think freedom is going to be a really central value in the future, which is going to come under so much pressure. And we're going to have to make a big effort to maintain it, to safeguard it. Because if you don't, it's not going to be peace we're achieving, maybe security in the best case. We might actually be able to achieve security, I think, with AI. But I'm not sure we're going to be able to achieve peace. Because there we need the human dignity, which I pointed out, and we do absolutely need the freedom. And freedom is probably going to be under more stress even than human dignity. So I think we really do need some good, strong legislation. Freedom of thought is going to be so absolutely vital to protect us against manipulation on so many different levels. I mean, even democracy going to be under so much stress if it's open to manipulation. How am I even going to be able to respond to all the influences that are reaching me?
Yeah.
Do I even have the autonomy still, the freedom to decide freely? So that's going to be, I think, a huge pressure to maintain freedom. Human dignity too, but that we might even be able to manage. That's by the way also criticism of human rights. Theoretically, you can achieve like a very dignified human life for everybody if you have enough resources and make sure everybody has a healthy life with good nutrition and housing and so on. But the question still remains, who is going to decide about the distribution of resources? Who is going to decide who decides, And is it going to be collectively or is it going to be like some elites, whether there be tech companies or political elites? I mean, even authoritarian leaders, you can have like benevolent authoritarian leaders, which could allow you to live in human dignity with surveillance, for example, which gives you security. And it might even be socially very, very well accepted. Because if you have a good, secure life, what speaks against it, right? But so it depends really a bit what we understand by peace, as I said. And I think freedom is going to be the one value which is really going to be at stake and which we should be protecting.
So can you let us know one thing, or maybe one or two things, that the average listener, whether it's someone who works in tech or just cares about these issues, something they can do to help advance AI's applications for peacemaking rather than war making?
Well, I can think of two things. One is that consumers do have power and their consumer choices shape who are the technology providers that will make it and grow. So, if you're using an ethical criteria also in choosing your platform, what are you using that makes a difference in the longer term? And second is also we do need to ask our governments to step up and be quicker in responding to the real challenges of today that, yes, are coming very quickly, but it's the civil societies and us as citizens that we need to demand our government to react much more promptly.
I mean, what I would add for policymakers or public servants is that I think we should be more careful with what companies do give contracts to, and also not exporting certain technologies to authoritarian countries where it's likely to be used for mass surveillance or repression. I think that's also a point. And I mean, as individuals, the technology side, as Johanna said, we're consumers. And I mean, also even to protect ourselves from harmful practices and really being aware what we post on social media, for instance. But also, I like to think of peace as an interaction, like cultivating peaceful interactions, even among friends, among families. Yeah, because else it's also very easy to get depressed in today's world. So even as a self-protection as well.
Thank you both.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for having me too. Thank you.
I went into this conversation somewhat skeptical about how much AI can benefit peacemaking. And what I heard from Johanna and Evelyne is that it can help us be more inclusive and better able to manage enormous volumes of inputs, including for resolving conflicts. The thing is, that has to be set as the goal. AI is a rules-based learning system that is moving really fast. We, as human communities, are not keeping pace. We're mired in conflict. And right now, it doesn't seem like we agree on rules at all, especially when it comes to international affairs. We've got to move faster. In our politics, in our spending, and in our workplace. Now is the time to demand concerted and thoughtful action to guide the future of AI. Thanks for listening to Disrupting Peace. I'm Bridget Conley. You can find out more about Johanna and Evelyne's work at the links in our show notes. Next week on Disrupting Peace, we explore how we can all get smarter about assessing the information we consume.
If you look at the bio, you will get signs of the sort of content that they publish. A lot of AI content creators will label themselves as AI. Parody accounts will label themselves as parody. You'll find accounts that openly admit that they are a hyper-partisan account that are pushing one political ideology. So when you check the profile, you get an idea of who the person is and whether or not they're trustworthy.
Also, we'd love to hear your thoughts. You can fill out a quick listener survey on our website at worldpeacefoundation.org/survey. Disrupting Peace is a production of the World Peace Foundation. Find out more at worldpeacefoundation.org. You can also find us on Instagram and TikTok at WorldPeaceFDTN. This show is produced by myself and Emily Shaw. Engineering by Jacob Winnick and Asia Simpson. Marketing and social media by Kaylin Song. Show artwork by Simon Fung. This season was partially funded by the Carnegie Corporation of New York. Special thanks to my colleagues, Lisa Avery and Alex Duvall, and the team from the Tufts Digital Design Studio. Okay, until next time, stay skeptical and hopeful.